At this point, we have a foundation of what testing is, what Jasmine testing looks like, and have set up our environment to be able to test Backbone code with Jasmine. In this section, we're going to start building our recipe app, starting with the recipe model. We'll figure out what the recipe is supposed to look like and implement it, all driven by tests. We'll also introduce a very useful concept in testing called fixtures, but we'll get to that in a few videos. First, let's talk about recipes. In order to build a model that effectively represents a recipe, we'll first need to know what a recipe consists of. All recipes have a name, a list of ingredients, and step-by-step instructions. Since the goal is to make these recipes and update them as we go, we'll also want to know what date they were made, what we thought about them, and a rating on a scale of 1 to 5. We could represent this explanation with 10 or more models and collections. A base ingredient could be its own model, storing information that it is a tomato, for example. Another model, a recipe item, could be the representation of a quantity of some base ingredient, potentially with a modifier like 2 finely chopped tomatoes. A collection of those recipe items would create an ingredient list to which a recipe model would refer. We could also represent each attempt at a recipe in its own model, which could hold the specific recipe, our comments on it, and the date we made it. We could continue down this path, but instead, let's take a simpler approach. We can represent most of this information in a single model, and while it may not be the very best way to represent it, we can at least get started before we get stuck trying to architect some giant perfect data model. Let's say that in our application, the recipe should default to some base values if none are provided. Since I often cook for friends and family members that have dietary restrictions, it would also be nice to know at a glance whether a recipe has nuts or eggs or is vegetarian. We can use these criteria to tell us what we need to write tests for, and when all 4 tests pass, we can be comfortable that the recipe does everything we asked of it. In the next video, we'll start creating and testing our recipe model based on these 4 specifications.